get us live on YouTube. Oh, great, that's going. And I just got to share a few posts that says, "Hey, we're live." So, what co-working space do you use?
I'm in the East Room. It's like right behind the Broadview Hotel.
And it's called the co-working space is called the East Room.
Yeah,
I've never heard of it. I'm gonna have to look it up.
it's pretty small, but it's got a neat vibe. I think there's a lot of like artistic folks in here. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's interesting how we'll get at the interview going in a minute. I like to give people a chance to join and that kind of stuff. It's interesting how co-working became such a phenomenon that we not only do have co-working now, but we've got co-working for fitness companies and co-working for creatives and co-working for, which is really interesting. That people
Mm-hmm.
can easily find their community in like a big place like Toronto where there's millions of people, right? It's just how do you connect with those people? And now there's places. Our home is Workhouse. They're our partner. They've got last time I checked, and again I haven't talked to them too much. Only a couple of times since COVID got going. They had 13 locations in going, and then 10 or 12 in Toronto and Calgary and Montreal. So it was really nice to be able to, as I mentioned before, we run different events. So we'll have an event breakdown. My main office is at Bay and Wellington, but they've got locations all over that have different vibes. If I need to meet with buddy, if I have a training session, or it was really nice working. It is really nice working with them. I just don't meet people live anymore. So as we were
Yes.
mentioned earlier, how
I
have
mean,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I mean, the real reason I'm working out of here is just to escape my 1-year-old. Like, if I was working in the same space as him at home, I would get nothing done. So,
Well, absolutely. And I would be at Workhouse 2 or 3 times a week if I didn't, like, as I mentioned, if it wasn't an hour commute each way for
mhm.
me. Because otherwise, it's just not. I can generally go to a Starbucks and have a similar kind of vibe that I'm in an
Yeah.
office. Um, Not with the same people and not with the same friendly faces that I'm used to, but I I think the co-working space is great for small businesses, freelancers, startups that really want a sense of community and have that office and don't have a kid at home or have there's two of you in a small apartment and both of you not
Mhm.
necessarily live with people at the same time doesn't work, all that kind of
Yes.
stuff. And just having a sense, because entrepreneurs, we do a lot of solo work, and it gets lonely, and sometimes you think you're all by yourself. And when you can be in a co-working space and you can hear the stories and talk to people who are struggling like you are, it really helps you keep going.
That's so true. 100%. Totally agree.
Excellent. Well, it's only 12:02. I'll give it a couple more minutes. You're
Yeah.
in Toronto?
I am. Yeah. Yeah. I live like a 5-minute walk from this place.
Did you go to school in Toronto?
I went to Laurier in Waterloo.
Ah, nice.
Yeah.
And what do you think about this gray weather we've been having for, I don't know, what is a week? Is it just gray?
Oh, it's the worst. It just makes me so tired. It just zaps my energy. It's brutal.
It's same with me. I don't mind if it's raining for a day or two. It's raining for a day or two. It gets depressing if it's raining for a week. But yeah, just the overcast. It does
Killer.
take your energy. Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
we have no reason to go out. Like for me anyway, my office is in the basement here. I've got the green screen behind me. That's not a, as you can see wherever my hand is, you can kind of see the
Mm.
camera break there. Sometimes
Mhm.
it, uh, so people can't tell, but I like the sun, right? I'm one of those people who are
Mhm.
affected by seasonal affective disorder. So when
Mhm.
the days shrink and you don't get as much light, it really affects my energy and my mental state. And so I
Mhm.
love to be out in the sun as much as possible, especially because the office is in the basement. So when they have these days, it's not quite as fun.
I know. I know. I've been debating potentially working from a beach for a couple months this winter, taking the whole fan and just going somewhere sunny because who cares where we are, right? Doesn't really matter.
Well, it's almost like the dream many entrepreneurs had years ago about, being anywhere in the world and working is acceptable reality for almost most businesses. So
Hmm.
it's not necessarily a dream anymore.
That's a thing. Like my whole team is remote, and it was kind of nice that we made that decision before we even hired anyone, because now we have access to all this global talent. So they don't need to be sitting in Toronto to come to a certain office. We can get just the best people for the job, whether they're sitting in India or down the street.
Absolutely. That your the talent pool opens up significantly. And we have a community, friends like Van Hack who bring in tech people from all over the world and help them come to Canada,
Mm-hmm.
find jobs, get the visa, and all that kind of stuff, which is great. And now being able to not just, if you're starting up in Halifax, you don't just draw off the people in Halifax anymore. You can now, in Toronto, we have a lot of resources, but now you're struggling. Good developers get what they want paid in Toronto because
Mm-hmm.
it's really hard. So sometimes you have to go outside to get a reasonable price at a early stage startup point of view. And so yeah, it's really nice to be able to have those options and for everyone to be willing and accept it. Like I said a few years ago, this wasn't acceptable. But how do you keep your culture when you grow and it's all remote and you don't really know the people like you would when you're sitting around doing the coffee chat or around the water cooler or the lunch break where you're sitting around in the lunchroom because you don't have that downtime together?
That's also my question. We're doing our best, and we're kind of figuring it out as we go, and we definitely try and make time to like connect as human beings outside of the single transactions we make when we're asking for stuff. Um, but yeah, it's got to be like a really deliberate practice to do that, because it doesn't happen naturally around the water cooler, exactly like you said. And this is really my first time working in a remote organization, leading a remote organization. So I definitely don't have all the answers.
I don't think most people do, and I think it's interesting as a society where technology and the way we do things are taking are giant leaps forward. Some of the software we're using, how we train, how we do schooling is now more project based and interactive
Mm-hmm.
because for people to learn. But at the same time, it's not the same yet. We really aren't, haven't made that leap. So I think people who are being educated remotely aren't getting the same education or the same level of experience as the people who are in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that's only a few years away till that changes, until
Mm-hmm.
we figure it out. But what I do like is some things like this force, hopefully, all the teachers, enterprises to take their educational systems, the way they learn and teach and jump forward. Because, I talk to teachers, they're learning stuff from 50 years ago, textbooks that are, this is how you teach, right? This is how you versus modern technology, a modern attention span, distracting from phones, all the different stuff. I think it's forcing everyone to relearn and take this drastic jump forward, and hopefully we'll be better. But the question is how long.
Yeah, and I think it probably impacts different people depending on like where they are in their lives and their learning style and all that good stuff. Like I I'm just not thinking creatively enough, but I can't imagine what an effective online school experience is like for a 5-year-old. Like, how do you keep them like sitting and attentive, looking at a computer without like the actual social interaction of other humans around them? But then on the other hand, like, and this is completely different, but like my situation of having a kid and being able to work remotely, like when my kid wasn't sleeping, and I needed a nap in the middle of the day, but I could do work at 3 a.m. Cool. That's how I bring my best self to work. And I was actually way more effective working on my terms versus like a standard 9 to 5. So it's, yeah, I mean, I hope technology catches up to a place where it can meet everybody where they are. But I honestly, I don't know what that looks like.
I don't know what it looks like. And did we lose work life balance? Are we losing that in the
Mm,
process where, um, you know, I'm not a 9 to 5er, and it's been a long time since I've been that person, but you know, when people can get a hold of you anytime, when you can work at 2 a.m. and get stuff done, and you're awake, do you automatically work, or versus do you, are you now working more and thinking more about work? That commute, that 30-minute commute time or whatever to the office, to me at least, disengaged me from mentally from the work process, allowed me to wrap up all the conversations of the day and all that kind of stuff. And then when I got home, I was more attentive at home. So does that
Mm,
happen now because we're all these things are together? It's interesting to see how, as a society, we're going to move forward. And you have a 1 year old, I think you said,
yeah, he's just over
and
one.
so you're going to have these things over the next few years anyway, and decide 4 or 5 years. Are you sending them to school? Are you going to remote school? Are you going to homeschool? What's the landscape going to be like in 5 years? Four or 5 years.
Ay, ay, ay. It's so tricky. It's so tricky to balance all this stuff around like what's the health risk, what's the social risk. Being a new parent is hard enough without these new decisions that have to be made. So it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's a real.
And I see all the parents and the information going on about this school does this and this school does that, and
Mhm.
outrage. And I don't know how schools or parents or children can win in this, where everyone's taking different sides on stuff, and it doesn't. Yeah, I don't. We're not dealing with the kids' lives and how they live versus um, everyone pulling in different directions and demanding different things. Anyway, we got extremists. We don't need to get into that. All right, I think we've chatted way too long.
Okay.
Um, are we ready?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
ready when you
Yeah.
are.
Excellent. Fantastic. Welcome back to Startup Talk. I'm your host, the Startup Coach, founder of TorontoStarts, one of the largest startup communities in Canada. And with me today is Kelly Pigeon, CEO and co-founder of Loopt. Welcome, Kelly.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Let's start off by having you tell us a little bit about Loopt.
Yeah, of course. So Loopt is an e-commerce platform that powers rental subscriptions. Our vision for the future is that people are going to subscribe to what they need when they need it, and then send it back. And honestly, this isn't a new concept. Think of renting your car and then having the option to buy it out at the end or send it back to get something different. We just believe that this model is going to transcend the categories where it exists now, cars, cell phones, and so on, into like everyday stuff. Baby gear, I was telling you about my 1 year old, and I have so much of his stuff that is now obsolete now that he's 1 year old. I would love to be able to send that back and give it to somebody new. And there's so many categories where that's true: furniture, clothing, baby gear, elder care, electronics, like the list goes on and on and on. So we're trying to reinvent the way retail works through our platform.
Well, our society as a whole seems to be going to life as a service. So this
Mhm.
kind of thing, and not owning things. Like there's a whole generation that this generation, and even from the World Economic Forum point of view, is saying that they're not going to own cars, they're not going to own houses, and everything will be rent. And if they decide that they don't like something this month, they'll switch it up, and next month, which is interesting. And I guess that's where the circular economy comes in. So let me ask you specifically about that. What is the circular economy?
Yeah, so I think the best way to explain it is to contrast it with the linear economy. So in regular linear economy, which is how we all grew up, you take from take the resources you need to make a thing, you take, you make, and then you dispose of it when you're done. The circular economy is sort of the opposite of that. It's regenerative, and there's a bunch of different ways that it can come to life. It can be using recyclable materials at the outset. It can be reusing that same good again and again and again, and repairing it and using its entire useful life, which is essentially what we help enable by having people rent the good as they need it and then send it back for repairs, and then the next person is able to use it. So yeah, it's a circle. It just gets used again and again.
Being someone who is older, it's a little struggle for me not to think about owning stuff. But as I take a step back it makes so much sense for things, lots of things. Like, I'm off the top of my head, I'm thinking of a drill. All right, I need to do some stuff. I make a list, then I go get a drill for a day, and I drill all the holes I need, and then I take it back. Because really, 99, more than 99.9% of the time, it's just sitting on the shelf doing nothing. Like it's used 4 hours of the year, let's just say, whatever it is. So some things like that are natural. And we talked earlier about COVID and how it's changing people working from home versus working at the office. When something like that happens, I imagine you'd want maybe desk or a better office chair or some other stuff. But it might be temporary. You don't know when you're going back to work or when you're not, and you only got limited space. And if you're not working at, you don't want this desk taking up space or all those types of things. Now, I've also seen it go as far as art, and many other things like art on the wall, like everything in between. Where I would think we just buy the art you like, and maybe 10 years from now you're sick of it. But if subscription model where every 6 months I pick new art that comes and it's a refreshed look, everything starts to change a little bit around. It's too expensive to furnish everything and change it all around if you have to buy it. But that's not the case if you're in a subscription model. And once you start extrapolating that to your life, your mindset changes completely. Have you found that?
Yeah, that's a brilliant example. And I think with this new generation being a lot more transient and not looking to be a slave to your stuff, renting on subscription is a way of making sure your stuff doesn't sort of burden you or hold you down. And I think there's so many different use cases. I think back to my time, even at university, where I would buy like a couch that fits my dorm room and a desk that fits that boardroom or that dorm room. And then what do you do with it at the end? Is it disposable furniture? There's really no such thing. There should be no such thing as disposable furniture. But that sort of approach of, well, I'm only going to use it for a year or two or three, and then I guess I'm done with it. Whether you're talking about really any category, it's an incredible environmental waste. It's an incredible financial waste because you're probably buying something cheap that you don't actually love anyways. And rather, if you could just pay for your portion of use for that good, you get something way higher quality that you actually love. So it's a real win-win for the consumer to get their stuff in this way.
It does. I think it's fantastic. The concept is great, and when you start, drilling down on all the things in your life, you can really take a look at. Well, I have probably, again, I'm from an old school where you have to own anything. I probably have 100 T-shirts, maybe more. Do I
Mhm.
really need that? Or should I be changing it up every few months and only have like 5 or 10?
And there's such interesting, innovative models that are coming out, even for things that get worn out over time. There's this brand of running shoe, actually, they IPO'd like 2 weeks ago for $12 billion. They're called On Running, and they have this shoe called the Cyclone shoe, and they market it as this is the running shoe you will never own. You pay like $30 a month, and you wear it as much as you want. And then as it gets worn down, you ship it back to On Running. They break it down and ship you a brand new pair of the exact same thing. And they're made entirely of castor beans. So they're entirely recyclable at the end of that use. So your t-shirt example, you may not want to share that actual t-shirt with 5 other people, but there are other circular models that are really interesting and upcoming, that sort of fit into this broader theme of circularity.
Yeah, and t-shirt was just a example because it takes up so much space in my house, and when you
Mhm.
start thinking about space and mind and all this stuff, you're like, well, if I have 2 jackets instead of maybe the 10 I have, and just change them up every once in a while, like that might be different. And I'm thinking obviously stuff I use every day, but that could be anything. Think about coffee makers or appliances or whatever. I just everything. So actually, let's take a step back, and I like to talk about who the entrepreneur was growing up. So were you a handful for your parents? Were you studious, into music, sports, socializing? Who was young Kelly?
Yeah, I was a big old nerd, and I, I kind of still am. I think one thing that my parents recognized in me like really early was that like I could go really deep in this like studious, quiet reading zone. And they pulled me out by getting me into like team sports and drama. I was in a bunch of plays, and I feel like those sorts of experiences have made me a way better, more confident public speaker, team player versus like getting in my own little zone. Um, so yeah, I was a big old nerd then, a big old nerd now.
It's hard to be a CEO of a startup and be an introvert. So I'm glad your parents helped a lot, because it really is a struggle. You really need to talk and be the face and speak and do all so many things that if that's a struggle for you, then your startup will struggle.
100%. I think that's probably true in most career paths. Require um, some level of salesmanship to win people over to your idea or way of thinking. And I think being able to communicate effectively and confidently is just such a important life skill. So I'm glad I got those lessons early.
It's funny that they don't teach this stuff in school, and it's one of the most important skills. Like there should be some basic communications skills in high school and whatnot, so that we as humans are better. It would help our relationships, our jobs, everything we do. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't. At what point did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur and run your own business?
Mhm. I didn't really have like an entrepreneurial awakening, maybe the way some others do. Um, I guess just a little bit of context on where I was coming from before I jumped into entrepreneurship. I spent my entire career growing up in corporate life at Johnson and Johnson, which honestly I loved. I spent the first 7 years in the Canadian organization, and then the last two in the US as the global lead of Band-Aid brand equity. And when I was living in the US, my husband was still living in Toronto. So I was commuting like every other weekend from New York to Toronto, which was exhausting. And I knew we wanted to live in the same country, city. And so I was going to move back. And it was a matter of, okay, what do I want to do for my career when I move back to Toronto? And at J&J, particularly in global, a lot of what we were doing was thinking about like, where is retail going in like 5 to 10 years, and studying these disruptors. And I just thought, wouldn't it be interesting, fun to sit on the other side of the table? So rather than trying to defend against these disruptors from the corporate side, what if I could be one of these disruptors? And honestly, what I did is I looked at the top 20 to 25 disruptors that were in the US that were not in Canada. And I went to those CEOs and said, I love what you're doing. Let me take it to Canada, and let me just take a snack of whatever I'm able to produce. And for the most part, the stage of the company was earlier on. So they saw more opportunity going deeper in the US first. And so I said, why don't I take a concept that's worked in the US and bring it to Canada? And we initially started as almost a Canadian copycat of Rent the Runway. And we had some decent success. And we pretty quickly got to the point where like this really simple MVP we stood up in the market, we outgrew the solution. We were on Shopify / an Excel spreadsheet we were using to track the orders. And so we built our own platform for our own business, and then realized, hey, actually, there's a way bigger opportunity here, and if we want to have a real impact, we could take this platform and bring it to other categories. That's a much bigger answer than I think what you were initially asking about, but it was not a straightforward path to like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur. It was sort of a tic-tac-toe to actually get there.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I like hearing the story and how you got here, and that really speaks to the opportunity cost. Why this problem, why you went through it. So let's get into specifically what exactly Loop does.
Yeah, so renting products on subscription has a few really unique requirements that we have figured out. So one of them is on pricing. So imagine you want to sell a chair and you put that chair on your website, you sell for $100, easy. If you want to rent that on subscription, well, that price should be dynamic and depend on how long you're renting it for, what other products you have rented, what kind of insurance you might have on it, all those details. And that is all accounted for in our pricing scheme. On the back end, as we look at how to sort of track inventory and understand the value that you're capturing, you need to be able to track every single individual item. So if you have that same chair and you have 100 of them, you need to know the life story of chair number 3 that you started renting out 12 months ago, has been on rent between 3 different users, got a repair back in August that cost $10, but has accumulated $200 in revenue so far. So, but you need to do that for every single individual item. And that's the other thing that our platform does. And then the third thing is around how the user actually interacts with the e-commerce platform. And one thing that's really unique about our solution is we have this renter profile where they can go into their account and they can self-select whatever path they want to choose. I've fallen in love with this chair. I must keep it. Okay, buy now with a dynamic buy now price. Okay, I'd like to return it. Okay, return and schedule a time or reprint my return label. A dynamic calculator for how much money you've saved, your environmental impact, all that good stuff is kind of wrapped up in this very unique sort of user account that is made just for the circular economy.
So, who are you finding are your clients?
Yeah, so we work with tier 1 retailers and brands really across the world and across categories. I'm under NDA with all of them, so I can't tell you specifics, but I can tell you that the folks that are typically sort of the bullseye for what we do have already started to see some of the benefits of the circular economy. They might have buyback programs, or they might be selling refurbished electronics or furniture or whatever their good is. But they understand that their products are part of the sharing economy already. If you look for any brand on Facebook Marketplace or Kijiji or whatever, it's there. And if you're not actively participating in it, you're losing out on shaping that brand experience, on earning your share of that revenue for the good that you produced. And so it's really the brands that have started to recognize that and see that as sort of their emerging competition, and are actively working to figure out how do I get my share of this new market.
So, on the surface, it looks like a two-sided market. But, as I dig deeper, it seems like it's a single-sided market focused on businesses. Can you explain how that works?
Yeah, exactly. So we white label our platform. So if a certain brand sort of sees an opportunity in this and wants to enter a rental subscription market, we essentially add their branding, add their products to a site that looks like it is that brand's. And then that brand has the ability to offer their products in different ways to their end user. So kind of like the way PayBright or Afterpay offers a different way of financing a product. This is similarly a different way of accessing that same product.
So, as a company who is using your platform, do I integrate your platform into my website, or is this a different place for people to go?
Typically, to start, we do sort of a standalone pilot. Um, we're API first, so it's really easy for us to integrate with ERPs to connect to inventory or delivery scheduling. Um, what's often simplest though, and really turnkey to just get something off the ground very quickly, is you just load up your inventory in our system and create this sort of separate microsite where we host and do the payment processing and everything soup to nuts, and press go.
Sounds like it's a complete solution. What does your business model look like? Who pays for what?
Yeah, so there's a few different ways we can work. If the brand already has sort of the refurbishing and repairs and cleaning figured out, we can be just the SaaS and act almost like a Shopify, where you're just paying for payment processing and like I said, the SaaS. We also have relationships with third-party logistics that are specializing in circular models and are able to do returns as part of sort of the pick and pack package. We work with refurbishers across a bunch of different industries, cleaners, all that good stuff. So we can make it a truly turnkey solution, or if the operations are already sort of in place, we can sort of fit into those operations and really just offer the software to enable it.
So, how big is the rental subscription market?
It's kind of hard to say. So I can tell you that the sharing economy is 335 billion, or it will be by 2024, growing at about 20x in a span of about 5 years. So it's growing like crazy. This subset across categories isn't necessarily measured, and I would argue it's still in its infancy. It's a category that is being created. We are actively writing the future sort of as we speak.
Are you seeing traditional businesses starting to adopt a rental model?
Yeah, oh my gosh, there's some really interesting models that are emerging. There's this company out of Europe called Grover that I think is just fascinating. They rent electronics on subscription. They're backed by Samsung, and they actually just launched into the US maybe 2 weeks ago, very, very recently. So electronics is moving into this space in a really big way. In furniture, I look at Feather and Furnish that have quoted like 300% growth during this pandemic. I think it's a bit of what we were talking about at the start around, okay, I need a home office, but I don't really know what the future holds. And so if I need to keep it, I have the option to, but I don't want to be sort of obligated to this stuff for the rest of its life and my life. Even big brands like IKEA have been really vocal about how they see sort of furniture as a service as a really key part of making their business 100% circular, which is their goal. So there's a ton of, even in Amsterdam for transportation, there's this company called SwapFiz, and they do electronic bikes on subscription. And you look around in Amsterdam, everybody is using these bikes. So it's really interesting to see it take hold in so many different industries.
So, not only is it financially lucrative for businesses to be able to technically resell the same product over and over again, um, what about the environmental impact? Someone like IKEA probably makes a lot of impact in landfills over years. Because
Mm-hmm.
people move like we were saying earlier. What's the environmental impact of this circular economy and what Loopt is doing?
It's such a good question. And it's something that we're working through now to get really crisp on how we calculate it and how we communicate it. One of the things we learned by running the clothing rental subscription is as renters rent, they want to understand their impact. And when we said back to them what their financial savings were from renting, they consistently fell off their chair. And so we want to be able to do the math for the user on both financial and environmental. Environmental is really tricky because all of these categories are different and will require different calculations. And we want to be precise because we don't want to mislead, but we also want to be easy to understand. So we're currently in the process of figuring out what is the best way to calculate and share our environmental impact. Is it a CO2 equivalent? Is it just the weight of the waste that has been saved from landfill and showing an equivalent weight of something that's more familiar? So it's a really tricky question that we are wrestling with right now.
Yeah, I've worked with a few different startups that are not doing what you're doing, but are tracking environmental impacts of their purchases and that
Hmm.
kind of stuff. So if you want to talk to me, send me a message offline, and I can connect you some co-founders who
Yes.
have tried to figure out, what the environmental impact is of this Amazon purchase or that or what have you. So there's some
Amazing.
things out there. Uh, you just finished the Google Accelerator program. I just talked to Paperstack on Monday, and they're just starting the program. I think they're in week one. Can you tell us what it was like and tell us about Google, specifically their demo day?
Oh man, I had such a great time being part of that accelerator. We were talking a little bit earlier about just like spending time and socializing with other entrepreneurs to just share in some of the hardships sometimes. So that was just really nice to connect with sort of fellow entrepreneurs, particularly during this time of lockdown where you're not as connected. Um, I think what I love the most about that entire accelerator program is how customized they make it to what you need. So you're sort of assigned a specific mentor and they go really deep on what are the challenges your business is facing. And then they pull in experts to help you solve your problems. So you really get out of the program what you put in. And if you challenge that team with really hard problems that you're wrestling with, uh, they really rise to the occasion. So, yeah, I would definitely recommend that program. And if you're in that program, make the most of it, challenge that team because they're excellent. And the demo day was great. It was interesting doing it entirely virtually. I think it takes off a lot of the pressure of like not literally being on a stage with hundreds of eyes on you. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot to compare it to, but yeah, really, really enjoyed it.
Now, were you looking for funding during the demo day process and going through the accelerator?
We weren't. We closed our latest round of funding back in April, and that should sort of set us for the next year or so. I mean, we're always taking conversations because you never know what you're gonna need down the line. But our main intention of our time with Google was more around getting their expertise as we sort of build and refine our product, as we build and refine our sales process. And they were incredibly helpful on both of those fronts.
Yeah, I like to talk about the funding question because one, startups are always asking about funding. How did you get funding? How did it work? And I like to compare demo days, and it talked about being in person. I talked to the Mark Campagna, founder of Oxio, and he did YC demo day in person down there, and he left demo day with like 160 investor meetings scheduled. I was talking to Matador yesterday about, they did most of their raise before demo day, and then they had a bunch of meetings after, and they ended up having to meet with, I think he specifically said, 108 investors over 8 weeks to get investment. And my rule of thumb is always need to meet with 100 investors over 5 weeks. How long did it take you?
Oh my gosh. Uh, yeah, I mean, that rule of thumb around, I'm sure we spoke to 100 investors. I'm sure we did, probably over like 5 or 6 months. Um, Honestly, it was a bit of a blur because this is also when my 1-year-old was like a newborn. So I was like feeding him and then passing him off and jumping on an investor call. And yeah, I'm really grateful that we have the folks at the table that we do. I think we found the right sort of strategic people to bring our business to the next level. We've got a really great mix of sort of tech experts, people with backgrounds in retail, like Kirsten Chapman, who used to be the president of Indigo, and sort of your professional institutional investor who has just really challenged us to raise our game. So it's been really, really great.
Everyone from a startup point of view likes to talk about hustle. What are you doing to get traction and build your audience?
Yeah, it's definitely more of an art than a science for us. Um, we keep our ear to the ground on sort of what is happening to disrupt some of the categories that we're in talks with. Um, so I think sort of step one is making sure we have a really great insight where we can add value, and then finding the right people. And I have been surprised at how well a carefully crafted LinkedIn DM actually works, even if there is no connection to that person. If you do your homework properly, and have a smart insight to build off of, given where their strategy is, the response rate is quite high. So it's really about just doing your homework and sort of thoughtfully approaching your top prospects.
Yeah, and there's a lot of tips there. I, do a thing on cold emailing investors and whatnot where we teach, different types of formats and templates. And, you
Mm-hmm.
got to do your investment. You're going to get one or two response if you do cold emailing and email and message 100 people. But if you take a few minutes, understand what they're saying, customize the message to the right person, you're going to get a much higher response. And I had, we were talking to startups, we do networking, and I help founders raise, and we do group founders who are raising. We all talk about our problems and how what's working for you, what's not working. And the DMs on LinkedIn, people are getting 2 or 3 conversations going with investors every day by
Yeah.
doing the DM LinkedIn messaging. And you got to do what you have to do, but you have to get that right. So it's going through accelerators, talking to investors, getting that basic message, what information you are conveying, and then customize it. And the one thing people tend to do is the wall of text. God, I hate the wall of text. You
Mm-hmm.
just get this big thing, my eyes glaze over, and I'm like, okay, I'm not reading this. Investors are the same way. You got to avoid that. So I like to try and share both successes and failures. So there's a chance that someone listening won't make the same mistake. Can you tell us a time where you screwed up and made the wrong pivot or a startup decision?
Oh my gosh, there's like so many to choose from. I think one of the biggest was right at the very beginning of our business when we decided we wanted to be this sort of Canadian copycat of Rent the Runway. And it comes a lot from my background of consumer packaged goods, particularly in the Canadian market. We would often look at what's Australia doing, what's the UK doing, what are similar markets doing, and lift and apply those learnings and just bring them to a new market or to our market. And what that ends up becoming is more of a bunt. You're not swinging for the fences when you're sort of copying an existing idea that works and bring it to a small market like Canada. And a bunt is really hard to earn funding for. it's really hard to get it to a place where the scale allows you to do what you're trying to do. So in our case, uh, we were trying to demonstrate the value of rental subscription to designers and like clothing designers. And as we were doing that, we were investing our money in the inventory until we got to a place where we could demonstrate that value and we could have a more collaborative sort of financial arrangement. But oh my gosh, that takes a ton of investment to get to that place. And in the meantime, the amount we were spending on inventory was incredible, and you need to have that scale to do it. And we were sort of set up in a way where we would not be able to reach that scale just based on the funding and where we were trying to get to. So I think making sure what you're aiming for is a big, fat, juicy, like swing for the fences, that's how you win over investors, and that's how you make a real impact on sort of the business world or the world at large. So I think that was sort of my biggest, wrongest move is not taking a big enough swing right from the get-go.
Yeah, I think people forget the mantra market size, market size, market size when it comes to investors. And, if you're looking early stage and you think you can grow up to $100 million company, most VCs aren't interested.
Yes,
So
so I learned.
and people struggle with that. What do you mean they're not interested? That's because once you start doing the math and you show them how equity works and where they're going to get the return, the light bulbs start coming on. So yes, you need to have a story where what you're doing is going to lead to this huge market. And I can see huge potential in what you're doing as a platform and laying the groundwork. And I don't necessarily see it as the circular economy, but as the environmental impact that all these companies are looking for. And you can, maybe it's the same thing, but I look at AT&T and T and these big companies in the US who want to get to net zero, right? How do you do that? And not only how do you do that, but how do you stop the landfills? How do you recycle your equipment? How do you do all these things? And if you have a platform that's ready to go when they're ready to have those awakening moments, that's an easy enterprise sell that is going to be worth billions in the long term. So never mind, this market. So there's all sorts of opportunity, and I'm sorry if I, tilted a hand there in the future that where you're going, but I
No,
think
no,
there's a
not
huge.
at all. You're exactly right. And like, it's so emphatically yes about the environment, and also just as emphatically yes about the business model. If it is just an environmental sort of win, that will not get adopted. This needs to be more profitable, at least as profitable, and in our case, more profitable than the current business model in order to really make a change in how business gets done.
Yeah, and if you look at the sustainability goals of some of these really big corporations, they're going to have to adopt something like this, period. So you're ahead of the curve here, and you say that I agree that the business model is just as important, but for a lot of big enterprises, they're already making money. The business model, what they're trying to do is they need to reach a carbon level or an environmental level to save them billions of dollars elsewhere. So it's great that it adds to revenue, but they're looking at this, and I think the opportunity there is huge. Now, I've had some meetings with AT&T and some of the other cellular providers in the U.S. recently for something else I'm working on, and really that is one of their number one goal is they have to figure out how they're going to do this. So imagine everyone else is thinking the same way. And I agree the business model from your point of view has to be just as strong. But from some of these larger corporations, even maybe Johnson and Johnson, because they're consumables, it's probably not the right company. But they're thinking the same thing. Everyone's thinking, how do I get to a net zero? How do I adopt a reusable, recycle in our company? And when you can start tracking all those things, it's funny. when you're talking about tracking movement and where things are, and then the return, what quality is in return, and insurance, all these things, I can only, there's a, it just, the mind goes blank. There's so many moving parts that a company says, how would I possibly adopt this? And I think you're coming along with solutions. Say, well, we take all of that away. You just got to figure out your pricing, and we'll help you with that.
That's exactly it. And what's interesting is we come from being operators. We ran our own rental subscription. So we know what the challenges are of trying to return inventory and having to go through like 16 clicks to do that. Let's have one single scan, one QR code, one scan, enter the any cost of repairs, enter the current quality. What are the customer questions, and how do we have our email engine answer those questions even before they're asked, so we can guide somebody through something that's a new model for the consumer also. So you're exactly right. I think we make this so straightforward because we have done this before, and we know what the challenges are going to be, and we've addressed them before they become challenges.
I think it's so important that, I'm working with another company with the exactly same type of thing they have to go through. Well, we really don't want to be creating products. We really don't want to be shipping them. Our value is over here with this technology. But in order to prove the market, we have to do this and do inventory and build all this stuff to go out there and say, all right, see, we're doing this and see how it
Mhm.
works. And also learning all those lessons around how do you do that. As a startup, it's so important to know what those problems are and have worked through them.
100%.
So you went through Google Accelerator. What kind of tools? I'm sure you've been talked to other startups all the time. What kind of tools or resources or communities would you recommend, and why?
Yeah, so my co-founder, Laura Bryce, is actually a director at the Founders Institute, and she's a mentor there. She does a ton of amazing work. So they're a great resource in Ontario and maybe elsewhere. um, the other thing I would suggest is like kind of creating your own sort of network of folks that you just click with and that are solving something similar. So we've been part of these accelerators like Google, and joined stuff like TechTO. And those are great places to sort of begin forming a spark with other founders. But I think the real magic and the real interesting depth of those conversations comes when you sort of progress those relationships on your own. So we've created peer groups of sort of similar industry, similar folks that we're selling to, all those sorts of things. And just, yeah, in some cases, keep it pretty casual and just stay in touch and share learnings and share leads and all that good stuff. So it's a little bit of using sort of those institutions, but also carrying it through on your own independently.
Yeah, wherever you can find your community, Founders Institute is a great global organization. And I don't know if Sunil still runs that. I know he's running Techstars and stuff now, but he used to run Founders Institute as well. I'm pretty sure he's still involved. Uh, and those are great. Tech TO is fantastic. You find all sorts of tech developers and great conversations there. Toronto Starts is great, but there's also lots and lots of communities, and I suggest people find their own. And yeah, those, it's the spark of the conversations are there, but um, working with entrepreneurs that are 6 months or a year ahead of you or 6 months or a year behind you, this is where the real benefit comes in. When you start talking to people, I've so many times introduced a few people, and a week or two later it's like, wow, I completely changed my product based on what this, his manufacturing experience with sensors and stuff, because he just finished his product, I'm just starting.
Yes.
And these things are it's like magic when you start making those connections. So get out there and find whatever community makes sense for you. Like we love all of them. We want
Yes.
them, wherever you find a home, that is fantastic.
That's it.
So what is next for you and Looped?
Yeah, so next we are looking to get into the market and sort of have a couple customers up and live early next year. So that is what we are totally focused on these days. We've built an amazing product and now it just needs to get out into the world.
Now, you're powering a fashion brand of some sort.
So our origin story is from fashion, from we call it dressed. We're really shifting our focus to the enterprise clients that we're working with using Loopt. The dressed brand was a really different challenge, sort of curating the right looks and acquiring customers and all that good stuff. So we've really shifted our focus from that to exclusively sort of this platform and working with enterprises to get them up and running.
Fantastic. I read a bunch of that on your website. I just didn't sure where that specifically fit in. So
Yeah.
if people want to find out what's going on with Looped, maybe investors are listening, or maybe just people want to follow you and find out what's happening, where can they go and find out more?
Yeah, you can check out our website, loopedplatform.com. You can always slide into my DMs on LinkedIn, Kelly Pigeon. It's a unique name. I don't think there's others. Uh, yeah, those are probably the two best ways to get in touch.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time today to tell our audience about Looped and your journey to getting here. It's been a great conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and we'll talk again soon.